Welcome to the Medovia Menopause Podcast, your trusted source for information about menopause and midlife. Join us each episode as we have great conversations with great people. Tune in and enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the show today. April is not able to be here, so it's just me, and we're going to have a great time. I am joined today by Lasara Firefox Allen. Lasara is a gender-affirming menopause educator, coach, writer, and advocate committed to uplifting genderqueer, trans, and queer-bodied folks navigating perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. With a foundation in social work and lived experience in the midlife transition, Lasara centers marginalized voices and reclaims menopause beyond binary narratives. Welcome to the show, Lasara. We're happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Hey, for our listeners, you should know that I stalked Lasara for a very long time to come on our show. So I'm really excited to have you here. Could you, introduce yourself beyond what I said and how your journey led you to find the genderqueer menopause coach, genderqueer futures work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm, let's see, where do I start? I'm 54 and I'm solidly postmenopausal now. As a genderqueer person entering into perimenopause, I became aware that I was in perimenopause in 2016. But I had already been experiencing the impacts of perimenopause for quite a long time at that point. I realize, now from my more educated standpoint, I had already been experiencing perimenopause for quite a long time by then. And, the thing that finally clued me in was my first real full-blown hot flash. But before that, I had been experiencing extreme PMDD, so premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which I think also, as I've learned more, may have been more solidly classified as PME or premenstrual exacerbation syndrome. And it took me a long time. Actually, I didn't realize until postmenopause that I had identified as genderqueer like basically my whole adult life. Even as a child, I was not compliant with gender norms. Always was very sort of ambiguous and androgynous in my sartorial sense. I loved wearing ties. My parents were hippies, so it was hilarious that I loved wearing ties. So from the time that I was very small, I sort of like gender didn't make a lot of sense to me. Roles, identity, any of it. But I didn't realize until postmenopause that part of my PMDD and PME was actually gender dysphoria.
Mm.
And so that's something that I hope we'll talk about a little bit more today, a little bit later on. But suffice it to say that as a genderqueer person in perimenopause in 2016, there were literally no resources for me that were affirming to my gender identity. I would go into appointments with providers and I would say, I'm genderqueer, my pronouns are they, them. And they would say, my lady's this and my women that. And, use female pronouns for me. And I don't fault them. I don't, it's not entirely their fault. It's a systemic issue. And so coming out of that long experience of just a ton of like low to medium to high level medicalized trauma, I decided that I wanted to change the landscape for my community and make it so that there were at least minimum resources available, which is why I decided to write the book, Genderqueer Menopause. And I started coaching my community members in the menopause transition. But since I wrote the book, I actually realized that my work really lies with medical professionals and menopause supporters, whether they're coaches or doulas or midwives. And the reason for that is that I teach a lot about self-advocacy in my work with my community members and in the book. I realized partway through writing the book that I don't want to have to educate my community on self-advocacy all the time. I want there to be options where my community does not need to self-advocate for basic levels of affirming care.
I love when people see a gap and it's just like, I'm going to go solve this problem. That's so good. And I love your story. Tell me, or tell our audience, there's a couple of terms that you use that are not everyday terms that people may not connect with easily. Talk about gender dysphoria. What does that mean and what does that look like?
Sure. So before we talk about gender dysphoria, I want to say that I think that the medicalization of trans identity is problematic. And I think that defining transness by dysphoria is a terrible model. I do not think that the experience of dysphoria is what defines someone as trans. Unfortunately, that's currently the metric that we have on a social, on a medical and social basis. So dysphoria is, and gender dysphoria specifically is what I'm talking about. Dysphoria is a sense of extreme discomfort with one's physicality. People can experience dysphoria separate from gender. Cis people can also experience gender dysphoria. Some of the basic levels of menopause might induce dysphoria for a cis woman, for example, with all of the front loading. We're taught to believe that we're going to lose our sexual relevance. We're taught to believe that we're going to, that so much of our identity is tied up in our reproductive capacity. So cis folks may experience gender dysphoria in menopause. Gender dysphoria currently is the sort of litmus test for trans identity in a medicalized setting.
And that is your brain and body don't match.
Exactly. So you experience your body as not being aligned with your inherent sense of yourself.
And someone not experiencing that has a really hard time imagining how that's even a thing.
Correct, which is why I kind of love to sort of push the edges out on it a little bit and give people a place where they may understand to some extent what gender dysphoria, full-blown gender dysphoria would feel like. When for a lot of cis women, I think, especially the way that menopause is currently packaged socially, and advertising wise, it's such a hustle to try and maintain our youthful identity and our youthful relevance. And because in this culture, unfortunately, aging in the female population and the assigned female at birth population is tied to irrelevance. We are expected to step back. We are expected to become invisible. We're expected to be all right with that, which is absolutely bullshit, right? So we're gonna call that out for what it is. That experience may give someone a template for kind of a little tiny taste of what gender dysphoria would feel like, where your experience of yourself is not lining up with how other people are perceiving you.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So what do you mean by gender affirming menopause care? And why is it important that we focus on that as a part of the, change that you're advocating?
Absolutely. So gender affirming care in general is medical care or other forms of care that take someone's gender into account in a proactive way. So, for example, as I was saying in my story, right, an example of non-affirming care is me going into a provider, stating my pronouns and my gender identity and not having that respected.
Yeah.
Right. That's the opposite of gender affirming care.
Sure.
Gender affirming care would be me walking into a provider's office, knowing from the outset that they are going to understand my identity, that they're going to respect my pronouns at base level, and that they're going to give me care options that fit with my identity.
Yeah, I know that makes sense. And it's hard enough to find a menopause doctor if you're a cis woman, a cis white woman, right? But when you add in the gender issues, you add in the race issues, and finding a doctor that can meet you where you are is really tough. So, how help me understand how menopause can be different if you're trans, non-binary, gender diverse. How is it different for that group of people rather than the cis woman?
Oh my gosh, it can be different in so many ways, literally so many ways. One of the things that I like to point out is that folks who are trans may experience variations on menopause multiple times in their gender trajectory. So, for example, some folks, when if someone is transmasculine and they start using high dose testosterone for gender affirming hormone therapy, they may go through a period of time that feels very similar to menopause. And honestly, the long-term impacts of, we don't know everything there is to know about gender medicine yet, gender-based medicine, right? So some of the long-term impacts of high-dose testosterone can be similar to some of the long-term impacts of menopause, postmenopause. So like increased cardiovascular risk, increased risk of osteoporosis. My hope and belief is that someday we'll be able to move away from such extreme genderization of hormones, right? Dr. Casperson likes to say hormones have no gender. I completely agree, and I have adopted that terminology myself in my work. Hormones have no gender. Our ovaries produce all three of the dominant sex hormones. So estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, right? The majority of our endogenous testosterone, as cis women even, is produced by our ovaries. So and this is not paid attention to in our culture in a way that makes sense because we're so phobic around transness, honestly. I believe that that's the crux of it. But that said, as our ovaries start sort of slowing down and coming to a kind of a halt over time, we're not just becoming deficient in the levels of estrogen that our bodies are used to or progesterone. We're also becoming deficient in the levels of testosterone that our bodies are used to producing and having on board. So it's worth taking a really comprehensive look at that and saying, this is something that we need to update. To get back to the concept of where trans folks and gender expansive folks in general may experience menopause differently, in addition to chemical menopause, right, which may be gender affirming hormone therapy, it may be induced by cancer treatments too. It can be induced by chemical menopause, can be induced by a lot of things. In addition to that, surgical menopause is something that a trans person may experience. So a transmasculine person or trans non-binary person who has ovaries and a uterus and elects to have them removed will experience surgical menopause if they have a bilateral oophorectomy. So if they have both ovaries removed with their hysterectomy, they will experience precipitous menopause. So that's where you don't have any perimenopausal symptoms. You just go from 0 to 100. You're like premenopausal to postmenopausal, literally in a matter of hours. And that can be very challenging. And I think it is really important for any gender affirming care providers who are listening to this segment to realize that probably a little bit more extensive counseling around the menopause transition in those cases of surgical menopause would be really helpful for most people. And I've heard honestly of a few cases of folks who had zero counseling about menopause before their hysterectomy. So and even at base, right? If the provider is going to give a surgery that results in surgical menopause, taking a menopause history, right, would be a great practice to integrate because we have no way of knowing what that person's risk factors are for cardiovascular disease or any of the other long-term impacts unless we do that work beforehand, right? And I think also a certain amount of counseling around what the menopause transition can look like in a precipitous way. So those are a couple ways that trans folks and gender expansive folks may experience menopause differently than cis women. There are other ways. So, and some of them are softer, right? They're not as sort of pragmatic and medicalized. They're more like the experience of gender dysphoria in the arc of menopause or perimenopause, the experience of gender euphoria, which I talked about a little bit. I think maybe I didn't. So, gender euphoria is the opposite of gender dysphoria. It's where our gender identity and our experience of our gender and how our gender is being received is all lining up, and it feels euphoric. It produces a sense of euphoria. So for me, when I stepped into my postmenopausal reality, I had like a very profound experience of gender euphoria, which was actually the trigger that made me realize that I'd been experiencing gender dysphoria previously.
It makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't, and I can only imagine that if you had gender dysphoria for all your life, that when you're able to match that up, that is definitely a place of euphoria.
Yeah.
And some of the things that you talked about with chemical that induces menopause are very similar for cis women as well, because they go through those surgeries and no one ever talks about what's going to happen after the fact.
Right.
But add on that some, gender identity issues, and I can see that that's a case for uncomfortable if
There's
not
another component that I think is really important to talk about too, and especially I talk about this with providers who are preparing to work with gender expansive folks. One of the elements of dysphoria in the perimenopause transition for a trans masculine person may be tied to erratic bleeding, which not only is going to cause like a higher level of anxiety because of the dysphoria, often related to not all people have menstrual dysphoria who are trans, right? I don't want to say that, but there are folks who are trans who experience dysphoria with their menses. So erratic bleeding can cause that level of anxiety. But I want to point out the social climate right now, obviously, doesn't feel safe for trans folks. And so a trans masculine person who is actually passing as a cis man, for example, in a climate that is socially not progressive, may actually have fears of their safety around erratic bleeding, right? Because if a person has erratic bleeding, say they don't have access to hormonal options for gender affirming care where they are, right? Say that they don't have a medical profile that allows them to do high dose testosterone or suppress their menses in another way. Right. There are a lot of reasons that a trans person would not be on high dose testosterone and might experience menses just like a cis woman would, on a regular basis, et cetera. As that trans masculine person goes into perimenopause, they're going to experience the same thing of erratic bleeding, more bleeding, hemorrhaging, all of those things that are possible in perimenopause, but they're going to experience it with an added edge in some cases of physical danger.
Yeah. Oh man. We talk in our training about, everyone's menopause experience is different. And if you're trans masculine and you're trying to be trans masculine and all of a sudden you're having menopause symptoms at work, correct, and you're not ready, you don't want to come out and you don't want to talk about it at work, I can only imagine the challenge that must be for someone trying to just be themselves,
Absolutely. And so one of the things when in Gender Queer Menopause and my chapter on self-advocacy, studies do show that actually being open about the menopause transition in the workplace leads to better outcomes across the board. So the work that y'all are doing is so important. And I do encourage those who feel safe coming out in that way at work to do so if it is safe to do so, right? Because the accommodations that will be available to them are different, because the symptom. One of the things that that is true about perimenopause and menopause is the increase in diagnosis of neurodivergence, right? So there's a statistical increase in diagnosis, late diagnosis of ADHD, menopause related anxiety, right? Perimenopause related anxiety is a thing. Uh, Autism, and also there's a statistical increase in recurrence or onset of eating disorders. And in the trans community, the instances of eating disorders are, I think, 8 times higher than in the cis community. And interestingly, right, and maybe obviously, but not to everyone, the sort of the etiology or the sort of progression of an eating disorder, why it starts, how it happens, what the reasons for it are different from cis folks. So when a trans person who has an eating disorder seeks care, if they do not have a gender-affirming eating disorder specialist, they may actually get advice that is going to compound their problem, not make it better. So all of these things coming up, right? The complications of, I don't want to make it all sound horrible, but there's a lot that is complex about the gender expansive experience of menopause. That said, I do also think it is one of the most empowering opportunities for self-knowledge.
Oh, I like that. That's a good way to look at that. And I'm sure that if you've been battling's not the right word, but if you've been challenged with this your whole life, you haven't even considered what menopause is going to be, do, look like, all of those kinds of things.
Right. Well, and there hasn't been a resource to even point you in the right direction until now.
Oh man, I love that you're doing this work. So, you talked about this a little bit, but what role does mental health, trauma, body dysphoria play in the menopause for people, and how do you support them during this time?
Yeah, well, again, honestly, it comes down to healthcare providers being prepared to, treat genderqueer and trans and expansive folks in an affirming way. And that doesn't just mean learning how to use the right pronouns, right? That's the baseline. Like if there are providers listening and you take one thing away from today's segment, it's people who menstruate, not women who menstruate.
Is that the right way, or people born with ovaries? That's usually what
Absolutely.
we say.
That is but I'm just saying a lot of people say women, it's like a mantra, women who menstruate, women in menopause. And we need to move beyond that frame. It's very limiting. And I believe that if we can move beyond that frame and see people as people, everyone's going to get better care, not just trans folks, because the options for treatment will open up.
Lasara, that is a crazy idea. Treat people like people.
I know, wild, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I said, that kind of languaging is the baseline, but the deeper levels of affirming care depend on your speciality.
Yeah.
So if you're a mental health provider, your training toward gender affirming care is going to have a different context and flavor than a surgeon or a medical provider or a coach or or an eating disorder specialist, right? An eating disorder specialist, if they are going to specialize in trans healthcare, has a whole other area of study and research to look into to become an affirming care provider.
Yeah. What would you say are the biggest barriers to integrating that into the healthcare system?
Implicit bias is the first one, right? That's the comprehensive one. But I think, that goes tandem with socialization, right? They're very interconnected. So implicit bias, our own internal process about our limitations, sort of putting us into having blinders on that don't allow us to see outside of our spectrum, right? So implicit bias coupled with systematic oppression.
You're out to change big things.
I mean, hopefully we all are, right?
Yeah. No, yeah, I know, but I mean, I mean, it's hard enough, but as I said earlier, finding a medical support person than to find someone that can meet you where you are.
Yeah, well, and on that note, I do want to give a shout out to two really great resources for folks that don't have easy access to affirming care. And those two resources are Planned Parenthood, which is absolutely a standby. I got my early gender affirming care from Planned Parenthood in a rural community, and they were amazing. And honestly, turned the corner for me, right? That care, that affirming care while in a rural community made things possible for me that hadn't been before. And the other resource, if you do not have a Planned Parenthood near you, is Folks, Folx. And Folks is a telehealth medical agency that is available in every state in the union at this point in time. And they started out as a gender affirming care telehealth organization, I believe, during early COVID. And they've grown, extensively, and they've branched out, and they do offer affirming menopause care, which, there are very, very, very few, especially national resources that are operating on that level. But Planned Parenthood and and again, I mean, with Planned Parenthood, even your mileage may vary, but if you find the right provider, they do have more training than your average clinic in gender affirming care. Folks is 100% gender affirming in their practice, and they do offer menopause support. So that's where I recommend for folks who are don't have an in-person option.
That's great. Thank you for that. Still staying on the medical piece, but slightly taking a left, if you will. What are some of the unique considerations when combining gender affirming hormone therapy with menopause hormone therapy? Is it different? Is it the same? What do I think about? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it brings me back to a point that I was circling around earlier with the whole hormones have no gender comment. As I said earlier, like, we don't know everything there is to know about gender affirming hormone therapy yet, right? We don't have enough, there hasn't been enough money put into it. There hasn't been enough research. It's, in some ways, I mean, it has a long and august history, but it's in the levels that we're seeing it performed now. It's a relatively young art, a young science, right? So there's a lot for us still left to learn collectively as humanity, right, around that topic. My hope and my hunch is that as we sort of move societally away from this hyper-gendered reality around hormones, that there may be room for folks treating trans folks who are seeking gender affirming hormone therapy with a combination potentially of high dose testosterone and low dose estrogen. And there hasn't been a lot of research done on this yet. We don't know if it would be highly effective. My hope is that sooner or later there will be enough research put into it that we would have a definitive answer on whether high dose testosterone coupled with low dose estrogen might remove some of the long-term impacts that are less positive for our bodies. And I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a researcher, but that's, I have looked at the research that's out there, and it's not exhaustive. It's not to the point where we can make a call on that one. But right now, where things are at, if someone is in perimenopause, I want to say, like, for a lot of us in perimenopause, our gender journey just keeps moving, right? So we may hit perimenopause and realize, oh, I actually want to be on high dose testosterone. That is a valid way to treat menopause symptoms. So it'll be more effective for some and less effective for others, but it is absolutely a valid way for a practitioner to help you attain your gender outcomes that you're seeking while also treating menopausal symptoms. So that's one way that it can be different. For me, as a non-binary trans person, I use all three of the hormones. Of the sex hormones. I take a medium dose of estrogen as a patch. I use bioidenticals because I'm more comfortable with it, and they have a different risk profile a little bit and a different feeling in my body. Personally, I'm very hormonally sensitive, so I was very hesitant, by the way, to use estrogen at all after I had been postmenopausal and was like, oh my God, I own my body for the first time in 40 years, 35 years, whatever it is. I was very hesitant to try estrogen, but I wish someone would have told me earlier on that just because I had had negative experiences with estrogen previously didn't mean that they would graph over. It's not the same experience. So hormonal birth control always made me homicidal and suicidal, honestly. Made me, it really worked. It was like, don't touch me, but that experience is not what having steady state low to medium dose estrogen on board is like for me at all. It actually feels great. So I use a medium dose estrogen patch twice a week. I'm on 100 milligrams of progesterone a day because my uterus is still intact. I thought about having it taken out, but I've had too many surgeries for them to feel really safe doing that. And then I take a moderate dose of topical application testosterone. I also use estrogen genitally to counteract any risk. And I did experience GSM, so genitourinary syndrome of menopause. I did experience that pretty severely in my early postmenopause trajectory, partially because I was on a pretty good dose of testosterone, and partially because I just wasn't taking care of my anatomy in the way that it needed to be taken care of. So I use a pretty substantial dose of genitally applied estrogen as well. So I use a tablet internally and I use a gel externally.
That's a great story because I was very nervous about all of those hormones too, especially estrogen. And now you're going to have to take it out of my dead cold hand.
Right, exactly.
I probably said that a million times on our podcast. It made a world of difference for me.
Yeah. Right. And so, because we haven't been having these conversations, none of us know that.
Right.
And also because there's been so much negative press around hormonal therapies because of that one bad study that happened in the 70s. That we're having to do a lot of rehab around that. And anyone who doesn't have updated menopause information, any provider who is not staying up to date with menopausal news and training is going to have an outdated opinion about hormones.
Yeah. Talk about all the time about, hey, if you know you want to do this and your doctor says no, it's okay to divorce your doctor and find one that will listen to you, right?
That's
it's
right.
Just so important.
Yeah, coupled with that, the other thing is for me, I know now that I was entering into perimenopause in probably my late 30s or, my very early 40s, and I didn't know it until I was in my mid 40s, and I didn't get treatment until I was almost postmenopausal. Right.
Yeah.
So that's practically 15 years of not getting adequate care. And so, if you think that you might be experiencing symptoms of perimenopause, you probably are.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that you're 38. It doesn't matter that you're 41. Go get the help that you need, get the support that you need, get the medical consult that you need.
Don't suffer.
Exactly.
For sure, don't suffer. So, given this political environment, and where we are right now, where do you see the field of queer affirming menopause care in the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think that it will, we've always been here. We've always been here. Trans people have always been here, and we've always found ways to get the care that we need. It's evolved over time. Sometimes it's been underground. Lately, it's been more above ground, but that doesn't mean it's going to stay there. So we all know how to get the care that we need. Even unfortunately, the more underground it goes, the less accessible it is, financially, as well as like just circumstantially. I do not know. I don't have a crystal ball to consult on this one, but I would say that the social trends are definitely pointing toward more of an underground specialization. And I don't see at this point in time, wholesale, adoption of gender-affirming menopause care in the next 3 to 5 years in this country. That said, I'm going to still do my work, and I'm going to still educate whoever's willing to listen. And, I have a course coming up starting the 28th of October. Oh, this will probably come out after that. But I have a certification course for gender-affirming care for providers. Menopause care providers specifically. So everyone from doctors to coaches to midwives, as I said earlier, anybody who wants to become a certified gender-affirming menopause care provider should get in touch with me. We can do work one-on-one. We can do work in a classroom setting on Zoom. The only way to get to the point of feeling competent and capable of treating trans folks in menopause with care and compassion is by getting the training that you need.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much, unless you're in that place, that you don't understand. You can't possibly understand if you've never been in that kind of situation, that you're, gender dysphoria is, if you've never experienced that before in a way that you understood, then it's hard to be able to understand what someone needs at that point. So I love that you're doing that. Okay. So given that, where can people find you?
They can find me. My link tree is the thing that I update the most often. I just have so many things going on in so many different places that I just drop my links into my link tree. And my link tree is at Lasara Firefox Allen. Folks can find me at Lasara Firefox Allen on most of the socials, or at Genderqueer Menopause, or both. So I have a really minor TikTok presence. I'm not there as often as I could be. I have a more consistent Instagram presence and intermittent Facebook presence. So any of those options are good, but my link tree is the space that is updated the most often. And I believe you can subscribe to my link tree. So that would be probably the best option for ongoing updates.
Okay. So if you are a genderqueer person approaching perimenopause, in perimenopause, on the other side, trying to navigate symptoms, identity, etc., what piece of advice would you give someone on how to self-care in this time of their life?
I mean, honestly, my point blank would be get a gender-affirming care provider. And if you can't figure out a way to access a gender-affirming care provider, find a gender-affirming coach or doula who can help you to advocate for yourself in a medicalized setting.
And how do I find that?
That again is going to be, you can find me and I can help you locate someone if I'm not available. I do occasionally still take a one-to-one coaching client in the case that they don't have other resources available. There are not many of us doing this work yet, but that will change over time. And again, if you're a provider and you want to be doing this work, find me and let's make it happen because we're needed.
Yeah. Oh man, I love this conversation. I could talk to you about this for a long time. Most people don't know all there is to know about menopause, and then top it on top of that with all of the things that we discussed today. It's a challenge to be able to talk about and do something about and feel supported. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Now,
thank you.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, we end all of our podcasts with the question, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? And I know when we opened up this before we pushed go, you were thinking of a few of them. So where'd you land?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we didn't get a touch on today was the role of grief in menopause. And it is a very substantial one, I believe, whether your grief is like endemic to the menopause experience and being caused by your relationship with your menstruation or your reproductive capacity, right? A lot of folks have grief that comes up around that, grief about identity, grief about, sexual realities, all of that, right? And because it is a substantial amount of time and it is placed at a time in our life when we're going to be experiencing losses, right? External loss also plays a role in the menopause trajectory. And grief and menopause can exacerbate each other. So the intensity of grief can exacerbate our menopause experiences, and our menopause experiences can exacerbate our experience of grief. I think the thing that has been, and I personally experienced a very severe loss in my menopause trajectory. I think the two things that I would say about that are, one, the concept of post-traumatic growth and how we sort of can lay the ground for that potentiality is so essential. And so I actually heard about post-traumatic growth on NPR on a radio show while I was deep in grief. And I think it might have saved my life. Right.
Wow.
And the other thing is, as far as grief goes, we don't get over it. We don't get past it. At best we integrate it and we grow around it. But that loss will define us, and it will temper us. And what kind of impact that has, we do have some engagement with. We can do things. We can adopt protocols that will help us to grow out of that rather than shrink.
I think that feels like a whole other podcast to me.
I'll come back if you want me.
I would love it. That would be great. Well, thank you for your time. It was well worth the wait, Lasara, as I was stalking you across all the internets. But thank you for joining us today. And to our audience, until we meet again, go find joy in the journey. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Medovia Menopause Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for future episodes, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend. Medovia is out to change the narrative. Learn more at medovia.com. That's MIDOVIA.com.